What's up, everybody? Welcome in to a very merry Christmas edition, Happy Holidays edition, New Year's edition, if we don't have an episode out before the new year, of SSPN. Ethan, how are you doing, my guy?
I'm doing very well. Merry Christmas to you, my friend.
Yes, I am. I am loving Christmas right now because this
Oh,
hat, this Victor Wembanyama shirt,
right on.
in the limited edition Hemisphere gear. I got it delivered to me yesterday, on top of a couple other Spurs shirts as well. So it was a very Spursy Christmas, not just in the fact that I got a bunch of Spurs gifts, but the fact that we were treated to our first Spurs Christmas game that we have in a while. And we won't go too into detail on a lot of the games that we've missed. We've missed 4 games since the last time that we recorded, but we will talk about the Christmas Day game just because it was down to the wire. I'm sure a lot of the people in this chat are going to give their thoughts about it, and we're locked into that yesterday. Give me your thoughts on that Knicks game, Ethan.
Yeah, disappointing. Obviously, you want to get the win, but at the end of the day, it was great to be able to watch the Spurs on Christmas Day. It's like basically when the NBA season starts for most people that aren't crazy fanatics like you and me, Jude, who watch it from the get go. Most people tune in starting in Christmas, and really for the most part, I thought it was a great game from the Spurs. It just came down, to that third quarter, and then in that fourth quarter, being unable to close it out. And you can't really account for Mikal Bridges being as hot
Yeah,
as he was, either 17 of 25 from the field. How many points did he actually finish
like
with, Jude?
40 something. I'm pulling up the box
Yeah, had
score.
41 points.
Yeah.
And when you're able to hold Jalen Brunson to 20, Cat to 21, like you expect to win those games, but Mikal
Hmm.
Bridges with 41. And there's a couple things you can point to. Could the Spurs have made some adjustments defensively? Maybe. You and I were texting about Stefon Castle, who didn't play at all
Right.
in that fourth quarter. Could he have slowed him down a little bit? I was thinking maybe, but then you were like, he was also just kind of on fire. And when I went back and watched the highlights again, I was like, yeah, like it wasn't bad defense on
It
him. He
really,
was just, putting the ball in the basket, which is really what it comes down to. And I think Wemby's quote in his post game, I'm going to paraphrase, but he was like, it wasn't anything that we did. I think he said like the Knicks didn't play a better game than the Spurs. Like he refuses to believe that. And I think that that's actually very true. It just came down to Bridges having 41 and the Spurs being unable to stop him in that third and fourth quarter.
yeah. And when you look back at that fourth quarter stretch late in the game, that three that got taken off the board, not saying the refs changed the outcome of this game, but just saying the three that got taken off the board,
Yeah.
where you definitely could have made an argument that maybe that shot was put up before the foul. Right. It's very so. Again, like
Yeah.
I'm not trying to sit here and say that's the reason we lost, but I think that was, a tough pill to swallow in the moment. Just kind of weren't able to recover from that afterwards because I believe we had about a 5-point lead at that time. Something like that. I could go through the play by play here. Let me actually just go ahead and see what that was to confirm it.
There was
Uh,
also the missed call or the referee report that comes out after the game. The only missed call that they didn't call in the last like 3 minutes was the Mikal Bridges actually traveled on one of his baskets that he made, but I think that was to put him up like 6. So they were already winning. So I mean,
mhm.
and it was such like it was one of those calls you where like he picked up his pivot foot when he like was about to dribble. We never called that, so I'm not exactly upset about that either.
Yeah, so they don't have this exactly in the because it was a basket that was taken off. I believe it was right here with the ref initiated review. It does say the Spurs right there though, so I don't know if that was our challenge, but I'm pretty sure right here is what is around the time when that happened because like I said, I thought we were up 5 and that would have made it 105 when we hit that 3. So it was somewhere in this range of the scoring. And when it
Yeah.
was taken off, the next shot that was made was a 3 by Josh Hart down here, which cut the lead to 3. So that's a big difference, having an 8-point lead potentially versus a 3-point lead. But also, as you can see, there was still a significant amount of time left. So if freaking Mikal Bridges is shooting the way that he's shooting, and as Tanner Robertson in SSPN OG says in the
Mm.
comments, every shot he hit was a contested turnaround. Again, to your point, like every one of those was contested. It wasn't horrible defense by any means. It was really just Mikal Bridges going off from
Yeah.
what I saw. But yeah, we could go through all the nitty gritty of this game, Ethan. But I think the main thing I want to harp on, yes, there's things down the stretch that the Spurs could improve on. They should have closed out better, right?
Mhm.
And I would like to see some more minutes for Stefon Castle, especially in that situation. Even if it doesn't change anything, I'd just rather have Stefon Castle on the floor than Trey Jones in that situation. And Trey Jones had a good game. We'll talk about him. But just from a defensive perspective, I'd just rather have him on the floor than Trey Jones in that scenario. I understand the other side of it. You want to go with experience. I'm sure that's what Mitch Johnson was thinking in his head. But just when it comes to a point of attack defender and somebody who can help on a guy like Mikal Bridges, I would just rather have Stefon Castle out there. In those late minutes. And going back to the Philly game from this Monday, I believe, Stefon Castle only played 13 minutes and scored 17 points, played really well, and just didn't get put back in the game. I didn't watch that game. I just saw the box score, but I had one of my close friends of mine that is a very big Spurs fan. He was harping on that, and he was kind of even more frustrated with it in the Knicks game as well when kind of the same thing ensued. As much as Stefon wasn't going off like he was in the Philly game, I honestly, I couldn't argue with him when he was like, I just would have liked to see Stefon Castle on the floor defensively in that situation late in the game than Trey Jones. And honestly, I can't argue with his logic.
No, for sure. And I remember that Philly game. I pretty sure I watched the whole thing start to finish and agreed he should have been in the game more than 13 minutes, especially when Julian had 29. He didn't play bad, actually. He was actually key to that win. But Keldon had 22, and that wasn't a great game from Keldon. You had Trey Jones, who had 14 minutes as well. So, like, you got to find a way to get him more meaningful time, especially in crunch time, because I think we really could have used him in both games. But statistically, just overall, before we go into the nitty gritty, another thing I noticed was the Spurs had 15 turnovers to their 5. And rebound wise, we were actually only 2 down,
Yeah.
but they
Yeah.
had 17 offensive boards to our 8. And those were like 3 possessions at the end of the game that really
2 of those were literally the last possession. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're fine. But that just helps seal the game for them. I don't know if it's a focus thing or if it's what we've been harping on all year, where it's just a personnel difficulty, where we need another physical presence, another big center to kind of help in those situations that we just don't have right now.
And to your point, we ran Jeremy at the 5 off the bench last night. Now,
Yeah.
some of that was because Precious Achiuwa is 6'9", and that's who the Knicks play, as their backup center. So that's somebody that Jeremy size-wise can actually match up with. But still, I think when we talk about needs on the team right now, I think, again, this is something we kind of knew going into the year, but still the thing that's standing out is that backup center position for sure. But before we jump into that, the other thing that I want to say, I mean, I'm looking at this box score and I'm looking at other guys like a Jeremy Sochan, and I didn't even realize how good of a game he had, at least box score wise and efficiency wise. 3 for 3 from 3 as well. One of those was super clutch where they just left him open. 8 for 10 overall. But I feel like we haven't been doing this enough, and it's not really our fault per se, because I think we're more numb to it than the rest of the league because we watch the Spurs every game. What Victor Wembanyama is doing, I know this is like, it's basic. Everybody kind of already knows this, but this is insane, Ethan. Like, it's not just last night. It's what we've seen throughout the entire season, man. Like, I just, we're so focused on winning and doing things for him in a sense, progressing for him, that we sometimes forget about, we don't harp on as much as what he should be doing, because it's like, oh, what he's doing is already a given. We need everything else surrounding him, to be better in these areas so that can be supported, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I just want to focus on what he did, man. I mean, 42, 18, 4 steals, 4 blocks, a steal, 16 for 31 overall. Maybe not the most efficient night from 3, but still 6 for 16. And like early in the game, when you're hitting step back threes in the right corner in somebody's face, like that sends a message to the Knicks, like, oh, okay, this dude, like there's some things that we can do against this guy that it just doesn't matter. And I think you saw kind of through some of Thibodeau's timeouts in this game that he was just like, all right, we got to change some things. I don't know what we're going to change, but with this dude, we can't keep doing this. So I just wanted to harp on Wemby there for a second. And I also want to say Wemby's Castle in his namesake in the chat. He sent a super chat early before the stream started, and it's not popping up in our restream here, Ethan, so you probably didn't see it, but I did see it on our just on like the actual live chat that I got here on my phone. So I'll read that here in a second. But what were your thoughts on Victor?
Yeah, man, it is easy to lose track of just how great he is when you lose games like this and where we are as a team. But unbelievable performance in Madison Square Garden. After last year, his first game in MSG was really, really bad. To come back and play this well on Christmas Day is pretty incredible with the 42 points, 18 boards. I know he only had 4 assists, Jude, but we've seen a seismic shift since the first game this year in shot selection. And now I think we're seeing that shift in just overall decision making as well. Not every pass is leading to an assist, but he's making great decisions on when he takes shots, where he takes shots, and when he, lets his teammates make plays. He had a few lobs last yesterday morning to Jeremy Sochan a couple times. He's making the right passes on cuts. He's not doing too much offensively, which is a definite change and definite improvement. But he also is scoring in a variety of ways in a variety of areas. I know he took 16 threes, but he also took some low block shots. He had a bank shot. He posted up on the elbow. He had some face up mid range jumpers. He's scoring in a variety of ways. And affecting the games. And I saw a tweet, and usually I ignore these tweets because they're not usually real Spurs fans, but they're like, this guy's ready to win now. The Spurs need to start making some moves roster wise to compete now. And I think a lot of times we get lost in the let's let everyone else develop. Let's continue
Yeah.
to draft and do it the Spurs way. But we're going to have to start thinking more seriously about trades, especially as we approach the trade deadline, because they're right. This guy is a top 10 player in the NBA today at 20 years old. So we need to really capitalize on where he is, and try and really make a playoff push like Chris Paul was talking about, like the young team narrative.
I was going to
It's time to kind of let that go.
Ethan, one of the things that we've done for the past couple years, and again, Wemby's Castle, we're going to get to your super chat, because if you send us a super chat, whether it pops up on our streaming software feed or we see it in the chat, we're going to talk about that because we really appreciate it. But just to touch on what you were kind of saying there, what I was going to open up with, over the past couple years, like last year when the season started, I remember you saying, okay, hey, I'm going to wait until Christmas before we have, any real big takeaways, right? And that's kind of how I felt this season too. And we're 30 games into the season here officially. The Spurs are 15-15 on December 26th, 2024. And I'm with you. We've probably been a part of the crowd that has pushed, the development, staying patient, going on this Rockets, OKC path. But even those guys made moves. We saw a little bit of some of the stuff that we did with Harrison and CP3 this year. But like you said, with what Chris Paul said in the post game interview yesterday, the young guy stuff, we at some point you've got to, it's different for the last 2 seasons, but now you're seeing the progression. And that's not saying the Spurs are going to win the championship or anything, but with the way we started the past 2 seasons, we are at a different level. Maybe that level's only fringe playing, but it's still, a different level than the bottom of the league.
Mm.
And, at some point, like you said, we got to make some moves to help him out. I mean, I'm not trying to be hypocritical and flip-flop, but just from what I've seen now, 30 games into the year with what he's doing, that's kind of why I went into that. I think there's some things that we can do to support him better. I think a lot of that starts with, first off, getting a backup center. Wemby's Castle was talking about Jakob Poeltl being available. I actually had another Spurs fan friend of mine mention that as well. I would not be opposed to that whatsoever. That's kind of in the weeds. I think we're learning that we've got some key pieces that can contribute right now. But as far, really, you could say there's a question mark on 4 guys on the bench, Ethan. If you want to say Stefon Castle is our 6th man, I know we've been harping on Champagnie. Me and you are some of the biggest Keldon defenders out there, but these past 2 games are games where when you're paying him $20 million, you'd like to see a little bit more. And really, I mean, at this point, maybe this was just a matchups thing, but I could see this being the point where Zach Collins and Charles Bassey have kind of been phased out of the lineup. And I think that's telling. So when I look at the box score right here, Ethan, I mean, really the 6 guys that I'm like, okay, I want to keep and have consistently contributed throughout the year are the starting lineup and Stefon.
Yeah.
And I
for
don't
sure.
wanna and sorry to I know I've finished talking
You're good.
here. One last thing. I know Champagnie has had a really good year. I'm not saying, like, we need to get rid of Champagnie, but one thing that I think blah, blah, blah brought up in the comments the last time that we talked about Champagnie and kinda compared him to Keldon, he brought up some good contextual points that, like, he's a 3-and-D guy, and he's playing in the starting lineup, so that's giving him more open looks,
Mhm.
et cetera, and kinda to that point, since we've moved him to the bench and elevated Devin to the starting lineup, not to say Champagnie hasn't been impactful or he's like sucked or something, but he hasn't been scoring as much. His numbers have been lessened since he's moved to the bench.
I'm going to raise the stakes a little bit on two guys, and that's Keldon Johnson and Devin Vassell. But let me say this first. Priority one, like you said, has to be getting a backup center. Like to me, that's the immediate fix that we should address either at the deadline or first thing come the offseason. But the second priority needs to be we need to just give Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson as many minutes as we can possibly give them for the rest of the year because they need to prove that they're worth the contracts that we gave them. KJ, I know it's a little bit of a weird situation. He's coming off the bench. He's not being given the ball as often, and maybe that's what the Spurs want to do. Maybe they just want him to be a cutter and a 3-point shooter, but he's not maximizing his 3-point shot potential right now. And he is only getting 25 minutes a game right now compared to Julian Champagnie's 29. But he's making, like you said, 20 million a year. So we need to let him have the opportunity at least to either play himself back into our rotation or play himself into getting traded for sure.
Yeah.
And Devin Vassell, only reason I bring him up is to raising the stakes. He's only averaging 16 points per game right now. He's only played 15 games and only started 4 because of that early season injury. And you and I love Devin Vassell. We think he has all-star potential. I predicted that he'd get to 20 to 22 points per game this year. So far, that hasn't been the case. He's really been up and down. His aggressiveness getting to the rim has been inconsistent as well. And his name's coming up in trade discussions. I don't know how serious they are, De'Aaron Fox being the main one. But, for the rest of the season, if he can't get closer to that 20 points per game level, then we really do have to consider moving on from him too, Jude. Because if that's what it takes to get De'Aaron Fox, and this is just the example I'm using because it's the headline right now. If we have to trade a 16 points per game scorer that's been injury prone and inconsistent at least this season for a guy that we know for sure is going to get us 20 plus and close to 10 assists a night, then I might take that, especially when you have Stefon Castle waiting in the wings and Julian Champagnie has been fire from 3. And we can probably find a role player, in free agency that can knock down a 3-point shot at a 40% clip to kind of replace that spacing need.
Yeah, man. There there's a lot to unpack there, and I definitely see where you're going with that. I don't want to change the conversation, but I just want to get to Wemby's Castle's super chat
Oh,
because
yeah, please.
if you're sending us money, like, we want to get to you. So this is what he said at the beginning, first comment in the chat. So shout out to you. Spurs not playing Castle in the fourth quarter against Philly and New York is unacceptable. Late game execution is also unacceptable. Anyways, all caps. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Hopefully a win tomorrow in Brooklyn.
Mhm. Love that. Thank you, sir.
Yes, completely agree on both fronts. And before I even saw that, I brought up the Castle minutes thing, and we were kind of talking about the late game execution as well a little bit there. But to get back to Devin and Keldon, okay, I will go with Tanner here. He says, for the love of God, how are we lumping Keldon and Vassell together?
Yeah.
And for as much as, like we've said, like we've been KJ defenders, I will say in my mind, I kind of have those two guys in much different categories as well. But what I will say is there's also some other good points being brought up here. To your point, when you talked about the inconsistency, Henry Rojas says what happened to Vassell in the last 3 minutes of both of these last two games, which were both very competitive games on the road against solid teams in the East. Well, I know Philly has had some struggles this year, but they were fully healthy last night with Paul George and Joel Embiid, as well as Tyrese Maxey. Both of those games were winnable down the stretch. And, we weren't able to get what we would have liked to see from the supporting cast in those games. Now, I will say, I believe the last game that we talked about when we were on here, Devin Vassell was somebody who stepped up amidst injuries and scored 23, 6, and 5. So it's not like he hasn't done that at all. And I think the minutes restriction, as well as coming off injury, definitely plays into this. But I will say that the leash for everybody on the team, it just feels shorter and shorter the more and more we see of Victor, as well as we are, despite there still being struggles and a lot of things the Spurs can improve on, we are seeing the Spurs impact winning more this season. And it seems like we could be doing it even more if there was some more talent around him, which is what Million Gnu said earlier. He said, I was in Madison Square Garden yesterday. He owned the game, but we really needed more talent. And not trying to psychoanalyze you, Million Gnu, but when I read this isn't him trying to crap on the rest of the team. This is him like, man, we have a special player. We can be winning even more. And here's the thing Victor has said since he came into the league. He said, I want to win as fast as possible. And he also said, oh man, I'm blanking. There was something else that he said.
Didn't want to skip steps. I don't know. I don't remember what you're talking about.
I'm blanking. I was just basically the point I was getting at is that Victor is someone who it wants to win and it's very competitive. This is what it was. It's not just that he wants to win as fast as possible, but he said he may only play 15 years because of his body type. So that's the other thing we've got to keep in mind. As much as we think Victor is amazing, well, it's not even we think. He is amazing. He's doing incredible things. He himself has said that he's probably not going to have the longevity of a LeBron, for example, or even a Chris Paul for that matter. So with that being said, that's another thing that could kind of push us to accelerate the timeline. That's something to wrap all of this up in a bow. You and I have kind of been not hesitant, but we've tried to be patient when it comes to that. I think with what we've seen so far this year, it's not that the patience has ran up. I think it's just became clear that he's ahead of where most players are. I mean,
for sure.
Maybe any player ever at this point in his career. And I think that the team's timeline has changed. Like that is something that I wouldn't have said 2 weeks ago, but now I feel like we're at that point.
I would agree. And just to set the record straight, I wasn't trying to lump Devin and Keldon into the same category, but I think my point is best summarized by Tanner Robertson's comment that if Devin isn't up to 20 points per game by his 50th game, then there are legitimate concerns. I think that's more so the kind of point I was trying to make about Devin.
Right.
For Keldon, that's an entirely different thing. That's more of an immediate concern. We need to see a turnaround for him by the trade deadline, or those discussions are going to become a lot more serious.
Yeah, absolutely. Just want to get to some of the other comments here, and we're gonna. So this is basically we were just gonna go over this Knicks game, kind of give our thoughts on it because it is Christmas. But as you guys see in the title, this is going to be our Christmas takeaways episode. So a lot of these conversations that we're getting into right now, maybe we'll skip some of it because we've kind of already talked about Devin and Keldon, but we will go through the roster and kind of talk about everything. But Floyd Kizzy, he says, guys, there are no shortcuts. This team is improving and developing. Let it cook. I see. I do see, like, I see the other side because we've been there. But I will say that I think one of the things that we can do is still have a good roster structure around it. I think we can improve some areas. Like, and I think when we say this, like, we're talking about the backup center position and then, maybe the backup point guard position. That's another thing that you and I have texted about as well. And then I think there's a lot of things that we can do in the starting lineup, as well, if we want to mix things up. I don't think we're not saying we have to come out here and make some major trade, but I think if something does arise, like a De'Aaron Fox or what's another name that's been floating around? I feel like I'm forgetting another one.
LaMelo Ball.
Yeah, that's another in that range. Somebody like a De'Aaron Fox who's proven, who can come in. Jimmy Butler was probably the other one I've been thinking of.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, not saying he's Pat Riley actually came out and said they're not trading him today, but that was probably the other one that was in my head. Just players in that realm, who are in their prime and can immediately contribute and come in and elevate things. I'm much more open to it than I used to.
I mean, we did it on the smallest of scales with Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, and we've seen it pay dividends. So yeah, Tanner, that's it is bad when you don't have a second playable center.
Yeah, for those on podcast, just pulled up Tanner's comment. He says, "Oh, do you mean not having a second playable center is bad?" And
Correct.
yes, that is exactly what we were saying. Okay, I do want to get to some of the other comments here before we jump into that, just because there were a lot that came in here. Um, Cowboy Tanaka was asking about De'Aaron Fox on the Spurs. I definitely wouldn't be opposed to that. I'm not, but I'm also not like, we need to go all in right now and trade for
Mhm.
De'Aaron Fox. Like, I kind of just
I'd
trust
like to
him.
wait a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I kind of like the point that you made about Devin and Keldon, like ride out the rest of the season, giving them a ton of minutes and really make your final evaluation after that. But one thing I will say, and I'll stand on this hill right now, I'm for us going and trading for a backup center at the trade deadline.
I am as well, especially if we can get off of Zach Collins' contract, which, as someone pointed out in the comments earlier, he is currently making more than Victor Wembanyama, which is absurd. And honestly, I'd like to give Mamu Kelashvili another shot, Jude. I mean, we can get into that in a little bit, but he- you know what? I'll wait. I'll wait for the larger
You're good.
discussion.
You're good. Honestly, I just want to read some comments you guys had. Cowboy Tanaka says, last game, I felt like we started to make the young team mistakes when Keldon came in. He says Julian is a keeper in his
For
opinion. He
sure.
can be a role sniper. Yeah, for sure. And one thing we've said about Julian this whole time is with his contract, man, like you can really make him a third stringer. Like this is so his versatility. Like when I'm saying like questioning, the rest of the roster that was in that Knicks game, not saying kick like guys like Julian who are on a very affordable contract off the team, but maybe we could find somebody who
Hmm.
could, play a little bit better than him. But also I think the more I think about it, I think I'd like Julian in that backup rotation. And if the backup rotation is surrounded by guys that are a little bit better, I think we can start to see some of the things we saw from Julian in the starting lineup off the bench as well. But another thing I'm seeing from a lot of people, they're just saying like July 26th, a lot of people said something similar as this. He says team needs another 20-point per game scorer on the team with Victor. And I get where y'all are coming from for sure, because if there's somebody else that can just go out and make tough shots, and be able to self-isolate consistently, keyword is consistently there, because that's
Hmm.
the thing with Devin Vassell. I get y'all's train of thought, man. I can't disagree with it because that would impact winning a ton. But
Hmm.
also, like you said, it's not something. It's a tough balance. It's obvious that we're taking another step, but it's also like you don't want to rush it too much. I know I kind of said like I would like to make some trades and I'd be open to it, but that's kind of what I mean also when I'm saying I'm not clamoring for something immediately. But the thing I am clamoring for is getting a new backup center.
I would agree. And I saw someone say, do we draft or do we trade for a backup center? I would say we trade only if we can get off of Zach Collins. If he's not included in the trade, then I say maybe we wait for the offseason because we have him under contract this year and next year. So if we can get off that money, Jude, I would literally take anybody that's taller than 6'9" that can potentially get us some rebounds and also be less money than Zach Collins because he's borderline unplayable at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to bring up Floyd Kizzy's point. This is another thing that I was
It's
not
true.
thinking about when we were talking about that. He says getting Fox will put us in cap hell. And the other thing we got to remember is the Victor Wembanyama contract. That will be the largest in NBA history when it gets signed. So that's a really good point there from Floyd. Like we do have to be cognizant of that as well. And that is kind of what'll sway you back to kind of let it cook type of deal. But also, like if we could make it, I hate to be here, but it's just the truth. It's where we're at right now. If we could trade Keldon Johnson and offload his salary, that 20 million or 16, 17 million, whatever it'll be in these last couple years, and get a backup center back, not only that isn't as big of a contract, not only would that fill a need off the bench for us, but it would also free up some cap for that potential Victor contract down the line.
That is true. I'm
We've still got,
curious.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I say I don't even know if it would require Keldon to get a decent backup center, though, is my thing. Would you rather give up
True.
Keldon or one future, even unprotected first round pick?
Unprotected first round pick because we have so many.
That I think that's what we could do. I think a combination of Zach and an unprotected first and maybe a couple seconds could get us a guy like, for just to use his name, Jakob Pertl, who would be a tremendous improvement off the bench.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point as well. I forget about the amount of draft assets that we have on top of that. But down the line, that is a contract potentially that you can think about. But now that I think about it, Keldon's contract might be up by the time that Victor is ready for an extension. But the other thing I was going to say that I also forgot to add, right when you were talking there, is Jeremy Sohan. That's another contract we're going to have to give out. And if he keeps playing like this, that's not going to be cheap. I'll just leave it at that.
No, it won't. But luckily, it doesn't look like we're gonna have to pay Malachi Branham.
Poor
And,
guy.
unfortunately, we can get into that
Right.
discussion in a little bit, and then Blake Wesley, obviously, his contract will come up at the same time, and he's likely gonna get something much, much, much smaller, and maybe even more affordable than Trey Jones, who's our current backup point guard.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. One little last thing on this before we move on. I saw a good comment from Floyd Kizzy as well. He says, every team that tried to shortcut has not won. The last teams to win developed their guys: Boston, Bucks, Golden State.
All made trades.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I forget who said that. Somebody
Boston
mentioned
did Derek
did
White,
that somebody mentioned that.
Bucks
Yeah.
Drew Holiday, and then Dame, but
Yeah.
obviously they haven't won with Dame. And
You
who was
could
the
say
last one?
that.
Golden State?
Well, and then there were the Nuggets in there too. I mean, he didn't
Nuggets,
mention
Aaron
them. Yeah.
Gordon. Aaron
It's a
Gordon.
combination of both, I think is actually what we're
Yeah,
realizing when we
it's
look at this.
development, and then at some point along the way, they have to make a trade to get somebody that to help. It's just a matter of when. Some teams pull it way too early, and that's what we're trying not to do. And some teams pull it way too late, and that's when they get stuck with guys that are way past their prime and a shell of themselves, like Carmelo Anthony to OKC back in the day. That was supposed
Yeah.
to put them over the top, and instead it just drove them even backwards because he was a complete shell of himself.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Okay, 2 more comments I wanna get to before we get into the team breakdown here. So, Tanner says, I think this is key. He says, "We should also accept that we're being used as leverage in rumors because of Victor." That's very
That's very
true.
true.
We're gonna be in so many more, trade rumors just in general. And also we can even use, like we said, we can use ourselves as leverage in trades as well, or being a part of discussions, et cetera, et cetera. TG Canoes and Kayaks, shout out to you being in here. He says, with Pop's health issues, curious on our head coach's status in the coming years. Here's what I want to say about this. I just, when the Pop news first came out, there wasn't a lot of information on it. Tom Orsborn reported that he was doing okay and that he was fine. So when we heard that and we didn't know, it was, hey, a full on stroke, as much as they did say it was a mild stroke, like still a stroke's a stroke. Um, I wasn't really even thinking about it.
Mhm.
And honestly, with some of the things that we've seen since then, not to say Mitch Johnson has been perfect. We just criticized the Stefon minutes the past 2 games. I'm sure that's what a lot of people are feeling right now. But still, overall, with the way that he's performed, I think that still exceeded my expectations to this point. He's shown me more than I thought he would, I guess is the way that I'll put it. But we probably shouldn't be too surprised with how many coaches and assistant coaches from the Spurs have become head coaches. And I was even thinking about this just while we're on this topic. Mitch Johnson, he may get some calls this offseason, with the way that he's done. And I know there's things that you can criticize for Mitch Johnson, but still, there's also some good things that he's done with the Spurs in this head coach role as well. And regardless, we're still at a completely different place than we were the past 2 seasons, as much as the roster is different. But the bigger thing I want to get at here, with all of that being said, is just kind of what are your thoughts on Pop's future with this extended absence? I know he came out and he wrote the letter and he said, thank you all for the support. Like I'll be back, on the sidelines as soon as I can. But I do wonder, I mean, going through something like this, if that's made him rethink some things. That's not me saying, oh, he's gonna for sure retire after this season, but I do think after this incident that the amount of time that I thought he would be here is a little bit less than I thought previously.
Yeah, I don't wanna, assume what he's
Right.
feeling or what's going on in his head, but if I were to make a prediction, I would say that he probably comes back at some point this year and finishes off as the head coach of the Spurs for this season, and then steps down next year to let Mitch Johnson take over as the head coach. That would be my prediction. It makes sense Spurs-wise. If it was me in his shoes, that's what I would do because he is very old at this point. I'm sure it was a health scare. He still has grandkids and kids that he probably wants to be with. But I don't think he would retire without coming back first because, like Tanner said, I think that the Spurs fan base would want to send him off the right way, you know, in the arena with Timmy there, Tony, Manu,
Yeah.
Dave, everybody to say thank you and to send him on his merry way to enjoy retirement.
And I don't think, frankly, the owner of Spurs Sports and Entertainment,
Right.
RC Buford, because he's now the owner, like the literal
Mhm.
CEO, I don't think he would even let him like walk without getting something
Right.
straight up.
And
So
maybe he's just sitting in the back and on the bench and letting Mitch be the coach, right? And he's more so there as like a glorified assistant coach or an advisory role. But I think going into next year, I think Mitch Johnson's the head coach.
interesting. Okay. Okay. I have some faith or some inkling in me that Pop might do one more year, but that's max. That's my max.
I wish we knew more about the stroke because they're saying it's mild, but that's also the Spurs. Like they don't want
Yeah.
to. Pop is private guy. The Spurs are a private organization. They're not going to air out the seriousness of something. So I guess it all just depends on what he's feeling, what's going through his head, and how serious it actually is. Because we'll never know unless Pop comes out and says it directly, or
Right.
we haven't even seen him, right?
Yeah.
Like he's literally just been at home. I'm assuming the entire time. So who knows how serious it actually is?
Yeah. 100%. Um, We appreciate all of you guys being in here in the comments. We really, truly appreciate it. We hope you guys had a happy holiday season. But we may not get to as many because me and Ethan do have some. I have work tomorrow, and we got things to do and all that. So we're gonna try to run through, not super fast, like skipping through it all, but just we're gonna try to run through the rest of this roster to finish our takeaways and wrap this thing up. So we're gonna stay focused on this here for a real quick, and then at the end, maybe we'll get to some more comments as well. So we've kind of already talked. We've talked about Victor, right?
Yeah.
Essentially. Okay. I just do want to bring this up just so we can like bask in his numbers.
Mm,
25 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists. Where are the blocks at?
4
4
blocks.
blocks a game, leading the NBA as well as a steal in this one. This is this season, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just making sure that wasn't last season because there wasn't one under it. It kind of threw me off.
Mm.
So I just had to pull up Victor's numbers, man. It's 35% from 3, 48% from the field, and 88% from the free throw line. We know Victor, man, but again, I want to try to appreciate his stats more. And I mean, it's not just all about stats, it's what he's doing on the floor that translates to the box score. He's just evolving even more and more. I think the thing that if I had to point out this season, Ethan, that has really stuck out to me with Victor is his perimeter play, his ball handling, and his shooting.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much I can add to that. He's been basically perfect after that first, 5-game stretch where it
Yeah.
was kind of hard to watch. Since then, improvement in decision making, improvement in shot selection, impacting winning, making the game simpler for himself. And the statistics, like you said, they speak for themselves.
All righty. Let's move on to Chris Paul, the
Mm.
man who is running the show on the floor. The stats might not jump out as anything crazy, but still 9 points, 4 boards, and 8 assists, as well as a steal and a half per game for the 39-year-old Chris Paul.
I think honestly he's been better than even expected. Again, statistically, nothing crazy, but to average 10 points, 8 assists with an assist to turnover ratio of 4.4, there's a definite just eye test change from last year to this year. And the difference not
Yeah.
only, as an individual player, but how he's impacting the rest of the roster, both just like statistically and then just confidence wise as well. I think he provides the team a lot of confidence. There's definitely a half court offense that we run through him that's different compared to last year. And despite being 39 years old, continues to be the CP3 that impacts teams better than pretty much anybody aside from LeBron James.
Yeah, Chris Paul's intangibles, the way he reads the floor, the way
Yeah.
he can set up sets, none of that has to do with athleticism. It's all basketball IQ. It's all skill based. And that's continuing to translate as well. 37% from three in this season as well. We've had those clutch Chris Paul threes. We even saw one in the Knicks game. As much as the last possession went wrong with us not being able to get two offensive boards, there wouldn't have even been a chance if he didn't pull up and hit that crazy three to make it 114 to 117. We've seen that in so many other games. At the beginning of the year, we were kind of complaining a little bit because we didn't see any sets. I saw so many sets last night. Now that the team's actually gelling together and we've got a game plan and the guys know each other. Man, Chris Paul has just been Chris Paul, kind of like Pop said. He just wanted him to come in and be Chris Paul, and that has done wonders for the Spurs.
Right on.
All righty, let's move on to the next vet. We'll stick with the vets here in Harrison Barnes.
Harrison started off really, really great, and he's tailed off a little bit statistically as well as playtime wise as of late. But I still think his intangibles, in the same way that Chris Paul's have impacted the team tremendously. I think he's an improvement over what we had last year and Chetty Osman. No disrespect to Chetty, but he's definitely a better player defensively. And then he spaces the floor. I think he's shooting 40% from three this year. So just being that veteran presence in the same way that Chris Paul is, but at that wing position.
Yeah, I mean, it's really simple for Harrison. He's been a floor spacer, a 3-and-D guy, and really that, not to repeat myself from preseason, but kind of what I was saying preseason is what's played out. The main thing for Harrison Barnes is when he's on the floor, that means one less guy is out of position. He's always in the right place. Okay, maybe always, you can have an asterisk. Every player, gets a little bit jumbled from time to time in transition or whatever it means. But for the most part, bringing that veteran presence, as well as the floor spacing and the switchability, the height and the length. Yes, there's things that you could criticize about him, but I still think he has helped impact winning and has definitely been an upgrade for us at the three.
Right. And I stand by if Harrison Barnes gets 20 points, we get the dub. That's a fact.
Cowboy Tanaka says, let's just hope he can shake off them over 10 shot games. Right. So there is things here and there to criticize for sure. But I think overall on the whole, that was kind of my takeaway as well. And on the regular season, 40% from three.
Right on. Yes, sir.
But in the last 10, 31. So I get where y'all are coming from with a little bit of the frustration from time to time. But let's get into the rest of this roster. So we've talked about Wemby. We've talked about Chris Paul. We've talked about Harrison Barnes. We kind of know what those guys' roles are, for the most part. Let's talk about Jeremy Sochan. What have you seen from Jeremy this year, Ethan? He's at 15 points per game, 8.5 boards, 3 assists, 54% from the field, 26.7% from three, but I'd still say you can say that I say this every year and it's not right, but I don't really care. I'd still say his 3-point shot looks a little bit better. Maybe that's because he's taking less and he's coming off a 3-for-3 game. But I mean, he's not forcing that much. We don't need to talk about the 3-point conversation because really that's not what Jeremy's game is. And that's not what's flourished this season. It's been the rebounding as well as scoring inside, being a glass cleaner, catching lobs, which is really the game that comes to him that now he's getting to play this year under these circumstances.
Yeah, I think a lot of people owe him an apology. Thankfully, we're not included. We've always been Jeremy Sochan supporters, Jude, on this show. But yeah, rebounding tenacity has greatly increased from last year. I think that was what we talked about in the preseason. At least for me, what I wanted to see the biggest improvement on from Jeremy was rebounding, and he has certainly done that at 8 boards a game right now. But he's been a perfect front court pairing for Victor Wembanyama. In a lot of ways where we talk about other guys underperforming next to Victor, Jeremy has overperformed. I didn't think he would be at 15 points a game. Didn't think he'd be at 8 boards a game. Certainly didn't think he'd be shooting 54% from the field overall. Certainly there's areas of improvement for him, but I think he's gotten better as ball handler as well. We saw that point guard experiment that was really ugly to watch last year. It's starting to prove dividends this year because at times we've had to play him at point guard and have him bring the ball up the court, and he certainly looks a lot better in that regard. And then defensively, he's always been a great defender, but he's just continued in that regard. He can guard 1 through 4, sometimes 1 through 5, depending on the matchup, and has been just a Swiss Army knife in every way that we expected him to be when we drafted him.
Yeah, I just think Now that we're not throwing him out there at the point guard position to start the year, as much as we have seen some of the benefits of that, and we've harped on it as ugly as it was when it happened, um, it him in this role just comes so much more naturally to him, and
Yeah,
his strengths are being able to be showcased more because of it.
1000%.
Alrighty. Any last thoughts on Jeremy, Ethan?
No, sir.
Alrighty. Let's move to let's go with Devin Vassell. So again, a very nuanced conversation with
Mm.
Devin, but also I understand why, there are things to criticize as well.
Yeah, I can't really make a final judgment of Devin. I know we talked about him earlier in the video, but only 15 games played coming off of that injury. I know he's been injury prone pretty much his whole career. That's definitely a negative that we can talk about, but I won't go there right now. 16 points a game, couple boards, couple of assists. I think he could be better as a playmaker, Jude. I think he can be better being aggressive to the basket because that will open up the rest of his game. But as a floor spacer, he's been great. As a perimeter defender, I think he's been very good. But there's definitely areas for him to improve in those categories that I had mentioned earlier. I just think he needs more time, a larger sample size. Let's give him to the All-Star break to really analyze Devin Vassell because he just needs more minutes in that starting rotation because he only started 4 games so far.
And when he came off the bench, he was on a minutes restriction
True.
too. So like that's the more we talk about this Devin thing, it's not that I want to sit here and make excuses because I get where people are coming from. We brought up Henry Rojas's comment earlier, and when you're watching the games, like there's only so many excuses that you want to take. You know what I mean?
For sure.
But still, when you're on a minutes restriction, your numbers aren't going to be as big. First of all, and then on top of that, he's just getting pushed into the starting lineup. Um, so I'm with you. I think I want to wait a little bit longer. But again, when I see Devin at his best, it's again those 25-5 games, whether that's a little bit over 20 points, but you've got some playmaking in there affecting the boards to an extent. I believe his first game back, it was similar to that as well against the Utah Jazz, where he had 21 points in that game and shot very efficiently. So as much as I say the minutes restriction stopped his numbers, his first game where he came back on the minutes restriction, he scored 20 points. So, and again, that was against the Utah Jazz, which is the bottom of the league. So that's key context as well. But still, that also is kind of, a hole in my own argument there. Like even with less numbers, he's been able to still score at times on the minutes restriction. But still with all of that context, coming off the injury, getting into the starting lineup, I'm with you. I want to wait a little bit to make a final evaluation. But what I will say is consistency. Offensively, defensively, like we know the skills and the traits that Devin has. It's just being consistent in them with more talent surrounding him. And that's kind of the interesting thing with Devin Vassell because, as much as we harped on this going into the year that we were so excited to see him playing off of these guys, and at times we have seen the benefits of that, really the main games where he stepped up have kind of been like that last one that we mentioned where a lot of people were injured when he had 23, 6, and 5. And some of the other 20-point games were all off the bench when he was next to the bench rotation. So kind of in this role next to Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes and Jeremy Sochan, at this point, again, there's key stuff behind it. The injury, just getting his groove with everybody. We've seen that with other guys throughout the year, how that's been important. Like I mentioned with Chris Paul and us, taking it a little bit for us to start running sets with him.
Mm.
I think still, I would have liked. It's only 4 games in the starting lineup. That's the key thing here. But I still would like to see a little bit more consistency and maybe things seem a little bit. It feels like things are a little bit harder than they should be for Devin with the things surrounding him. Does that make sense?
For sure. There's a lot of context to when he's playing and who he's playing with and in what role. Certainly, I'd like to see a consistent role for him, and then we can actually have an analysis.
Okay. Yeah, I gotcha. But for Devin, what I will say as of right now is just, having less of those peaks and valleys,
Yeah,
in the field goal percentage, as well as, maybe some mishaps defensively. Because I'll be honest, as much as he had a nice clean block in that Knicks game, and I get that there was a lot of contested shots that Mikal Bridges hit, but at the beginning of the game, Mikal was kind of cooking Devin even on like backdoors and stuff. It wasn't just isolation hitting crazy shots. Like he was able to beat him in some other IQ stuff. And again, he's at a different point in his career, has played in a finals, which Devin Vassell is not. So like that's key as well.
Mm-hmm.
But again, those are the things that we'd like to see cleaned up just a little bit more consistency wise.
He's middle of the pack defensive rating wise. I just looked it up. He's 11th on the team, right next to Keldon and Malachi, which isn't great company. But below him is Stefon and Blake. So it's hard to
Yeah.
like is defensive rating really all the end all be all? And then according to this, Mamu, who has had limited play time, is our 4th best defender as well.
Yeah.
And Zach's our 5th best.
We've got some people in the comments. July 26 says his defense has fell off. He feels like Tanner feels like he's been a poor on-ball defender this season. And Clement also says, I'm out on Devin as a serviceable defender narrative, but he's a great offensive player. I'm not panicking on that side. And then to wrap it all up, kind of the sentiment that we came with and you were emphasizing, Ethan, Floyd says, Devin will have to have the season to see what we have. He needs to be more consistent. I think that kind of sums up where we're at. All righty, let's see. We're getting close to an hour here, so maybe we'll punt some of this to the next episode, but we'll go through the main names here. So the next one we got to talk about is Keldon Johnson. We've still seen a game here or there where I think he's had 2 20-point games this season where he's done the same thing that Keldon always does. You know, when we need buckets, except one of those was a blowout and another one where he had 25 was actually crucial to keeping us stay afloat, which is kind of what we've seen at times over the past 2 seasons. But still, unfortunately, at $20 million, 12 points, 5 boards, 27% from 3 overall, and 20% in the last 10 games for Keldon. Not really too much of a defensive impact as well on the numbers, at least, with basically an assist and a half a game. Again, the box score isn't everything. There's a lot of things that Keldon does off the floor that are valuable. But if I'm just being completely honest here, it's been an underwhelming start to the season for Keldon Johnson. And I'm the last person who wants to say that.
Right. It's honestly confusing to me on why, because the drop off hasn't just been in one area. It's really been overall. Defensively, I don't expect anything crazy from Keldon Johnson. We know who he is. I think he's giving better effort this year than last year, but we know who he is. He's not going to be a great defender. But it's scoring the ball, it's playmaking, and it's efficiency for me, Jude. He's shooting 27% from 3 this year, which is really alarming considering last year he shot 35%, which isn't world breaking, but at least it's respectable. He's gotten to the point where when he shoots a 3, it feels like that's our last resort. And I don't expect it to go in, which I didn't think I would be at that level. We know he's going to get 5 boards a game. We know he's going to play with high energy. He's going to get a dunk or 2 a game, but it's been extremely inconsistent, Jude. And I'm not sure what the cause is. You give him the ball like we did 2 years ago. He averaged 22 points a game on efficient shooting, but you surround him with better talent and you give him a point guard, and it seems like he doesn't necessarily know where his role fits with the other guys. Because, like, who do you want with the ball? Trey Jones or Keldon Johnson? Playmaking, Trey Jones. But then that isolates him to either being a corner shooter or, you know, a crasher to the rim on great cuts. And he's a good crasher to the rim, but not so much a great corner shooter. So I don't know. I expected him to be a more ball dominant guy, Jude, and be able to get his own shot, you know, whether that be in the mid range or on a post up. But it seems like he's not as aggressive as he once was. And I can't even blame him for it because his efficiency is so much lower.
I think it comes down to his role this year. And, you know, I think the role was more clearly defined. And I think, unfortunately, the areas that he needed to progress in, again, it's 30 games into the season. We're not even halfway through. Maybe he can turn it around. Let's just say that. That's an asterisk. But we kind of need him to be more of a corner shooter in the way that he plays this year. And he has been taking shots, but, you know, 20% in the last 10 games, 27% overall from the field. Like, we're not really asking him to go downhill and just drive inside, you know, and draw 2 so he can drive and kick anymore, which has kind of been the offense for the Spurs over the past 2 seasons. Now we're not really doing that, even off the bench. You've got Stefon Castle he's had to share minutes with. You've got Devin Vassell that he had to share minutes with when he was coming off the minutes restriction and coming off the bench. I think those are kind of probably the main two guys that would take shots away from him off the bench. But even then, this was the other one I was forgetting. When Jeremy came back from his injury, a couple games having to share minutes with Jeremy off the bench. So all of those things are going to decrease his numbers. But again, it's kind of rightfully so because you'd rather have the ball in those guys' hands. So that puts Keldon in more of an off-ball role. And I think now at 25 years old, he just might not be. It may be the point to say where it probably is the point to say that as of right now, from what we've seen from him in his career, he has not been a consistent off-ball player. We had the beginning of the 2021-2022 season where he just was scorching hot from three. And kind of since then, it's been like 32% and below.
Yeah, it's not looking good, Jude. And it makes me wonder, like, is there a better option for him? Because I want him to flourish. Maybe it's just a fit thing. Maybe on a different team, he's a different player. And I saw some guys on Twitter that aren't necessarily Spurs fans, and they're talking about, oh, he's mini Westbrook. Put him on a team where he could have a 30% usage rating, and he's a different guy. And it's like, well, maybe that's true. But I think he's kind of played himself out of some of his value this season.
Yeah.
So what can we get in return from him? Because personally, I'd like to get a wing that can be a 38+% shooter off the bench, right? And the name that comes to mind, with Julian Champagnie.
Yeah,
but
go ahead. But finish.
I mean, I'm looking at some of the lower standing teams that might want to tank for the rest of the year, and I see the Brooklyn Nets, and I think Cam Johnson, but he's played himself up in value. I remember before the season started, I was like, we could probably get him for a first, and maybe Malachi Branham. I don't know, because he's shooting. He's getting 19 points a game out there and shooting like 42% from three. Now, would you swap Keldon and him and throw in a first? I would, but I don't know if the Nets are going to go for that. And then I look at the Wizards. I think Corey Kispert, but they're kind of in a weird place. Maybe Keldon would help them win too many games. They're trying to lose games. You know what I mean? I think about the Raptors, but Bruce Brown is maybe the only guy they trade, and he's not exactly a great shooter. So it opens up a lot more conversations, a lot more nuance to the trade discussion. And to be honest, I think we need to give him till the trade deadline as well before we make any final assertions. But it's sad for me because I'm a massive Keldon fan. I think what he did for us 2 years ago was unbelievable. And I just wish he fit better as that 6-man ball dominant scorer, but it seems like he's uncomfortable in that scenario.
I think you hit the nail on the head there in the end. Regardless, I think as of right now, it feels like we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And me and you love Keldon. We always have. His energy is infectious. The guy he is in the locker room, there's a reason the Spurs gave him the contract they did. But at some point, you do kind of got to accept that it does feel like it's just an uncomfortable fit for him right now. Straight up.
I don't know if the money works on this, Jude. I just saw the name and I thought it'd be funny. If we can somehow get Jakob and Justin Champagnie for Keldon and Zach, I might do that.
Hey, yo, Tanner said in the comments earlier, trade him for Julian X2. Let's just trade him for his twin brother.
I mean, Julian has played so well with us. We might as well give Justin a shot.
The Champagnie brothers. And then we can switch their jerseys. And they'll think it's Justin, but it'll really be Julian.
I mean, he's averaging 9 and 7 right now. Wait. Who's he play for? Oh, wait, is he for the Wizards? I might got that wrong. He's for the Wizards, not the Raptors. So, I mean, even still, not Corey Kispert. Maybe
3-team trade, baby. 3-team trade.
Let's try and go after Justin Champagnie. Why don't we?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up our thoughts on Keldon there, Ethan. Any final thoughts?
No. Hopefully he has a better next 2 months than the first 2.5.
All righty. Okay, we are getting to the end of the episode here, but we will do a couple more. Let's talk about another person who is huge on this team, Stefon Castle, the rookie who has exceeded our expectations. The stats may not jump out at you necessarily, but still 11.5 points, 4 assists per game, 2.5 boards, a steal a game as well. Um, I don't think the numbers really do it justice with Stefon. He's had some games where him and Wemby, Area 51, have both had 20 plus and helped carry us to wins when other guys were either injured or weren't able to contribute. So you got to look at those, especially under the rookie context. But everything that Stefon does that is like the stuff that makes him the best is stuff that doesn't show up on the stat sheet. Where he places himself, his physicality, his basketball IQ, the way he's able to read the floor, the way that he can set up sets, his versatility and switchability offensively and defensively, and impacting winning as well. I think what he's doing right now, you and I expected him to be that at some point, but I don't think we expected it this quick.
Dude, I just love the way the dude, I say kid, he's probably, no, he is younger than us. I'm 24. I'm getting old. The
Yeah.
kid, he carries himself with so much confidence. Yeah, Tanner, most confident rookie I've seen since Wemby. That's pretty funny, but true. He's got so much aura. I mean, he reminds me in so many ways of Kawhi Leonard. Hopefully it's not in the negative ways, but just a quiet guy that goes about his business and is able to compete at a high level at only 20 years old. I think we need to make this kid a starter, dude. I really
Yeah.
think he should start next to Devin Vassell at the shooting guard next to Chris Paul, and then have Harrison Barnes come off the bench. I know he's not a great shooter right now. He's only shooting 25% from three, but as a defender, as an attacker to the rim, and as a playmaker, he has been unbelievable so far this year. And I think he was at his best when he was starting during Devin's injury. I think
Yeah.
he's good off the
I
bench,
agree.
but I think he was better when he started.
I agree. I see the appeal of putting him in the starting lineup too. I mean, it's going to happen eventually. So that's the other thing. We'll see what happens with Chris Paul. But I mean, ideally, look, they're listing Stefon at 6'6", 215. That's the size of a three. Whether you want to play him at the two or the three, it doesn't really matter. But Devin can definitely slide into that floor spacer role that Harrison was playing beforehand. So I don't think that muddies up the starting lineup very much. And I also think that Harrison coming off the bench would add some value to the bench unit as well. So I definitely see your train of thought there. We'll have to see what the Spurs ultimately do, but I'm kind of with you, man. I just I just love what I've seen from this kid so far. And his intensity and his mentality. Even yesterday, like it was the first time we really saw him celebrate when he dunked over Jalen Brunson and he pointed at him. It's not like super braggadocious or arrogant or anything. It's just, hey, I got you, bro, and still got that stone cold face, man. I can't wait to see what this kid becomes, man. I'm so happy we drafted him, and it really feels like as time goes on, he may be the best player in this draft class.
I think for sure, especially no disrespect to this guy, but did you see who the second place rookie of the year voter is right now, or rookie of the year nominee is right now? Evis Missy or Misi.
Oh, from Baylor, the center.
The center. He's playing for the Pelicans, who are atrocious because of injuries right now. But he's second place right now, and Stefon Castle's running away since the Jared McCain injury. In a couple of years, for sure, he's going to be the second best player on this team. I have no doubt in my mind about that.
And Michael Hunt says, at fellas, shout out. I like the at fellas. If y'all want to refer to us as at fellas instead of SSPN, I'm not even joking. Like here, like genuinely, I like that. Y'all go with that. Sochan is the best player on this team right now, and next year it will probably be Castle. Good draft picks.
Sorry, the comments are funny from Tanner.
Oh, oh my goodness. But shout out Beezy. Shout out Brian Wright.
Damn right. He may have missed. Was JP his pick? His first pick? I can't remember.
No. I think it was Samanich.
Samanich was his first?
I think so.
All right, he's not perfect. He's had a couple misses, but I mean the Castle pick is looking like it's going to go down as a great one. So shout out my guy.
Same with Jeremy for sure.
Right.
And the Victor pick was, it's just all right.
Yeah, Garrett as a guarantee. That was
just all
layup.
Right. The only reason I remember that is because I think I looked that up and I was like, oh yeah, it was Jeremy, and then I was like, oh, it was Luka Samanic.
Yike.
Hey, shout out Trey Jones.
Trey Jones, a huge second round pick. Huge.
That saved that draft.
Yeah, it really did. Well, Keldon.
Oh Lord.
Wait, is Keldon the Samanich draft? I'm pretty sure he was. Trey Jones was the Devin draft, bro.
Oh, wow. There you go.
We're
Okay, so
cooked.
Keldon, regardless, Keldon,
Keldon
somebody
saved that
saved it.
draft.
Somebody
Jeez.
saved it. Oh, Lord. Okay, do you know if there's ever been back-to-back Rookie of the Years on the same team? I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't know off the top of my head either. That's a great question,
I
though.
bet everybody in the
Oh,
comments is
yes, Andrew Wiggins, Karl Anthony Towns.
okay, yes. Forgot for a second I was like,
Am I not
Cavs?
am I
Then
not the GOAT? Am I
no,
not the greatest of all
no,
time?
there you go. That was a splash, man.
Oh my god, I don't know how I pulled that out of my hat. That's crazy.
You got it. That was like when I said when we were talking about Tim Duncan's win, and I was like, against Charlotte, right?
Oh, yeah, that was
And
that that one was crazier. That one was nuts. I don't know how you did that.
I don't know why I remembered that, but for some reason I did. And Mansley, I don't know, says it was the Wolves. But here, I wanted to get to Floyd's comment. Last thing on Stefon, he says Castle does have a Kawhi Leonard vibe. Nailed that pick. And I know when a lot of Spurs fans hear this, we'll be like, no, he's not going to leave the team. He's not going to not play. But when it comes to that demeanor,
Stoic.
the stoic, the stone faced, but he's just got that dog in him still. I see what he's saying. As well as Kawhi kind of had to develop his offensive game when he came in the league. He wasn't as natural as a playmaker as Stefon, that's for sure. But still, someone who's a really good defender who needs to kind of develop the rest of their offensive game. I see what Floyd Kizzy's getting at there.
Mm.
All righty. I think we will kind of leave the rest to the next episode that we do. But the last thing that I think we can talk about, Ethan, let's just bunch these guys together. I'm going to stop the screen share. Zach Collins and Charles Bassey, as well as I know you wanted to mention Mamu as well.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know this is three guys, but throw them all in there because it's all the front court. They're all coming off the bench. What are your thoughts on the whole the backup front court situation?
It's been slim pickings as far as a backup center is concerned. I think Charles Bassey has had some great moments, and I think matchup-wise, he is the perfect guy over Zach Collins. I think Zach, whatever confidence he had coming into the year, he's lost it all. And I know you and I were giving him so many benefits of the doubt with his playmaking, with his ability to be a high IQ ball handler at that center position and space the floor. All of that is out the window in my eyes because he's just been so unplayable thus far. And I think honestly, he is benched
Yeah.
right now. And maybe matchup wise in key moments he'll play, but he's benched in Mitch Johnson's eyes too, I think. Mamu, I think, has played well and shot 40% from three at that third option at the center spot. But even he, for some reason, can't get playing time. I think we need to give Bassey the minutes right now, but I think Mamu needs to get more key plays because both of them have been far superior to Zach so far.
Yeah, when it comes to Mamu, I think I know he's had some games here and there. I think the biggest reason he hasn't gotten playing time is, I hate to put it this way, but he's a rebounding liability.
That's so true.
I think that's
So
really
Zach.
right. So I think that's really what it comes down to. Now, I don't mind. Like we've thrown some minutes out there with Mamu at the 4 next to Wemby. Like I'm not mad at those spot minutes, or if we want to give him some spot minutes off the bench as well, depending on how the rest of the lineups play out. Mamu, I think what we've seen so far, he's a 4. He's a pick and pop 4 who can come in and give you energy. We've seen it for the past 2 seasons in 2 different Nuggets games where he's came in and kind of taken it over and helped us get a win over a team, a championship playoff type team. Obviously, those are just singular games in the regular season, but I really think those games kind of encapsulate what Manu can bring as an energy guy off the bench and a floor spacer. And he does still give effort. As much as I said he's a rebound liability, that's not because he doesn't try. It's just he's almost like it's why he plays the 3 for the Georgian national team. He's more of a slender, skilled guy, but is very tall. And Victor's just a different animal. He doesn't he can have a similar description, but it's just completely different. In regards to Zach and Charles, man, I'm with you. Again, not to agree with you on everything, but straight up, like if we're playing a backup center, I want it to be Charles over Zach at this point. And I think Charles still even has his deficiencies, but I still like his contract. Like when I talk about wanting a new backup center, same kind of thing with the Champagny conversation. I'm not mad at keeping Charles as a third string big because you never know when injuries can happen as well.
Mhm.
And I think also he plays with passion for the Spurs as he kind of grew up here a little bit as well, as much as he was an immigrant from Nigeria. And I think, kind of giving him a second chance in the league as well. I think, knows the system, all that stuff. Like, I think he's very valuable as a third string five. And I still have some hope for him with what he's done at times this year to maybe potentially be the backup center. But I also think there's a reason we're not playing him. Like, there's a reason we didn't play him yesterday.
Right.
And I just kind of am trusting in the Spurs coaching staff in that, whenever it comes to my assessment of why they're not playing him in that situation. But at the end of the day, that's kind of where I'm at. And I think I'm even where July 26th is at as well. He says Bassey and Mamu over Collins. And I think I'm at that position as well, too. And I feel bad, for Zach. Here's the one thing I'll say about Zach. As much as we criticize him, and I get everybody else's on-court criticisms, and like you said, everything that we had optimism-wise for him when we signed him kind of is out the window. Zach has never stopped being a great teammate. He's never complained. He's still on the bench. He doesn't look like he's pouting or anything like that. He's continued to support the team through this.
Right.
Obviously, that doesn't impact winning, but I just want to say that about Zach. Like, as much as we can have criticisms for him and we can be frustrated with him, he has been the last thing of a locker room cancer, and I think he's handled this situation very maturely.
100%. Couldn't agree more. Still love that he got technicals and got thrown out of a game and flicked off a ref. Love that. I think the problem is that he makes
year, baby.
Yeah. I think the problem is that he makes $20 million a year. And you know what's crazy? I'm looking at it right now. Guess who is going to be a free agent next season?
Does Zach make 20 mil?
Pretty sure he does.
I think it might be a little bit less than that, but I could be mistaken.
Let me look. I'll look right now.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, you're totally right. He's making 16 mil this year.
Okay.
He's going to be making 18 mil next year.
Damn, that's pretty close to 20 then. That's closer than I thought.
Guess who's making 20 mil right now? That's going to be an unrestricted free agent next year.
On our team?
No, like in the NBA. And it's a really broad question, but
because I was thinking Keldon, right off the bat.
I'll give you one hint. He's from Texas.
Like, when you say from Texas, do you mean like he himself is from Texas, or he's on a Texas team?
He himself is from Texas.
Okay, and
he played college basketball in Texas.
Okay.
This is really broad.
I was thinking Clint Capella at first.
Close.
But he's not from Texas.
He's not.
Give me a second. I don't know.
Clint is unrestricted, but that's not who I'm talking about. Miles Turner.
Oh,
okay. Yeah. He will be an unrestricted free agent making 20 mil this year at 29 years old. And the Pacers aren't playing all that well right now, Jude. That's a guy I'd throw 20 mil at for sure to be a backup center, because that is like way overdoing it for a back. And he could even start next to Victor if he wanted to play Victor at the 4 spot. But we can get into that at a later date. I just thought that was interesting that he's making almost the same amount of money as a guy that can barely get on the court for the Spurs right now.
Well, think about it this way. He's making as much money as Keldon as well.
Yeah, and impacting winning. Well, I guess he's not impacting winning because the Pacers aren't that great, but you know what I mean. He's a more impactful player than Keldon is right now.
Yes, for sure. Especially if you put him on this team, that would the where he would play, whether he would start or come off the bench, is a whole nother conversation. But I definitely am opening to signing Miles Turner. That would be awesome.
Yes, Tanner. He's only making 20 mil. Isn't that crazy?
Okay, I think I have the answer to all of our problems, Ethan. This backup center position, I have the answer to it. And we threw it away. We threw it away last offseason. Tanner says Dom Barlow. Sad face. Imagine.
If only we still had him, Jude. Honestly, that would fix a lot.
All I got to say is last year we were sitting here like, is Dom Barlow better than Zach? Now imagine if he had another year in the Spurs development system, Ethan. This is like if we kept Drew Eubanks. Why do they get rid of all of our backup centers? That's 2 backup centers that we've been on over 2 different eras of the Spurs. If we could have kept either of them, this problem would be solved. It would be even better if we kept both of them, because then we'd have the greatest greatest front court. Well, shoot,
Right.
play him at the back court too, because
Doesn't
I'd like
matter
to
where
see
you
him
play 'em,
cross
yeah.
people up. No, but it'd be the greatest front court in Spurs history and NBA history. Dominic Barlow, Drew Eubanks.
There's nothing for me to add, Jude. You hit it nail on the head.
In all seriousness, I hope we make a trade for a backup center at some point at the trade deadline. I really do hope so. I really like the Jakob conversation as well. If we could get Jakob and we can get a reasonable deal for that, I would love to bring Jakob back. I think him off the bench, not only would he have chemistry with some of the guys that we bring off the bench, but I think he'd be a guy who would be willing to kind of play the backup role next to Victor, and you can still give him a ton of minutes as well, and maybe even experiment with a little bit of Wemby at the 4 next to him. I know we've kind of shooed away the Wemby at the 4 conversation, but again, that was before we saw 30 games of this season as well. It's hard to put a cap on anything that he can do, but I would like to say, on a serious note, to end the backup center discussion, I would definitely be open for a Jakob Poeltl reunion with the way that the Raptors are playing and the fact that they're saying that he is on the trade block.
Aligned.
All righty. We appreciate all of y'all for hanging out with us today. Tanner says, appreciate the company, fellas. The pleasure is all ours. And thank you guys for giving us some company as well. This is one of the longest episodes we've done in a while. And it was nice to just kind of break down the team, talk about things. I know a lot of you guys in the comments have been saying, hey, we missed the post games. We've only been able to do these game recaps like a couple days after they've happened. Me and Ethan are just doing our best with the schedules that we have adulting. So we will continue to try to make that happen, but it's not because we're done with post games. We don't want to do them anymore. It just hasn't aligned with our schedule in a couple weeks, to be honest. But we will be here regardless at some point throughout the week, whether it's a post game or not, to talk about the Spurs. And we appreciate you guys supporting us and being with us through it. So if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to hit that like and that subscribe button below. If you want to stay updated with the show, follow us on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. We hope you guys had a happy holidays. Merry Christmas. We hope that you go into 2025 with some Spurs wins. Hopefully tomorrow you have a great Friday. You can go into that New Year's weekend leading into next week with a win against the Brooklyn Nets. We hope so. We'll catch y'all later. Go Spurs, go.